Hello, this is An English Teacher Reads, reading chapter 69 of the Bantam Classics, The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count was heavy-hearted as he left Mercedes, in all probability never to see her again. Since the death of little Edward, a great change had taken place in Monte Cristo. Having arrived at the summit of his vengeance after his slow and tortuous climb, he looked down into the abyss of doubt. Furthermore, his conversation with Mercedes had awakened a host of memories which now had to be overcome. A man of the Count's character could not remain for long in that state of melancholy. He told himself that in order for him to come to the point of blaming himself, an error must somehow have slipped into his calculations. "I'm not considering the past correctly," he thought. "I can't have made such a mistake. Can my goal have been senseless? Can I have been following a false path for 10 years? I refuse to accept such an idea. It would make me lose my reason. The reason for my present doubt is that I no longer see the past clearly. The past fades away with time as objects fade away with distance. The same thing is happening to me as happens to people in dreams when they see and feel a wound but can't remember having received it." Monte Cristo walked down the Rue Saint Laurent to the quay. A pleasure boat was passing with its canopy spread. Monte Cristo called to its owner, who hurried eagerly over to him, hoping for a good fare. It was a beautiful day, but despite the clear sky, the graceful boats they passed in the harbor, and the golden sunlight with which everything was flooded, the Count, wrapped in his cloak, remembered one by one the details of the terrible trip he had made there years before. The sight of the Château d'If, which told him where he was being taken, the struggle with the gendarmes when he tried to leap into the sea, his despair when he felt himself vanquished, and the sensation of cold when the barrel of the carbine was pressed against his forehead like a ring of ice. Like those springs dried up in summer which gradually begin to flow again when the clouds of autumn gather above them, Monte Cristo began to feel the bitterness which had once flooded the heart of Edmond Dantès. From then on there was no more clear sky and sunlight for him. The sky became veiled in mourning. The appearance of the black mass of the Château d'If made him start as though he had suddenly seen the ghost of a deadly enemy. As they approached the island, the Count instinctively retreated to the stern of the boat. "We're about to land, sir," said the boatman. Monte Cristo remembered that it was the same spot, at that same rock, that he had been violently dragged ashore by the gendarmes, and that they had forced him to climb that same ramp at the point of a bayonet. There had been no prisoners in the Château d'If since the July Revolution. It was now inhabited only by a detachment of guards whose duty was to prevent its being used by smugglers. There was a guide waiting at the gate to show visitors through the monument of terror, now become simply an object of curiosity. And yet, although he knew all of this, when Monte Cristo descended the dark staircase and was led to the dungeon he had asked to see, a cold pallor invaded his forehead, and he pushed an icy perspiration back into his heart. The Count asked if any of the former jailers still remained, and was told that they had all been retired or given other positions. The guide who was conducting him had been there only since 1830. Monte Cristo was led into his own cell. He saw the dim light filtering in through the narrow window. He saw the place where his bed had been, and although now filled in, the opening made by the Abbé Faria was still visible. Monte Cristo felt his legs give way beneath him. He sat down on a wooden stool. "Are there any stories connected with this prison other than that of Mirabeau's imprisonment?" asked the Count. "Yes, sir," replied the guide. "One of the jailers told me about a story about this very cell. Would you like to hear it?" "Yes," said Monte Cristo. "Tell me." And he placed his hand over his heart to repress its violent beating, frightened at the thought of hearing his own story. "This cell," began the guide, "was once inhabited by a prisoner who was a very dangerous man, or so I was told at least. Another man was a prisoner here at the same time, but he wasn't at all dangerous. He was a poor priest who had gone mad." "I see," said Monte Cristo. "And what form did his madness take?" "He was always offering to pay millions of francs for his freedom." "Did the two prisoners see each other?" "Oh, no, sir. That was forbidden. They finally made a secret passage between their cells." "Which one of them made the passage?" "It must have been the young man. He was strong and energetic, while the poor priest was old and weak. Besides, the priest's mind was too confused to follow a single idea." "Blind fools," thought the Count. No one knows how the young man made the passage, continued the guide, but there's no doubt that he made it. Look, you can still see the trace of it. He moved his torch up against the wall. Oh, yes, said the Count, in a voice hoarse with emotion. As a result, the two prisoners were able to communicate with each other. No one knows how long this lasted, but one day the old prisoner fell ill and died. Can you imagine what the young one did then? No, tell me. He carried the body into his own cell and put it into his bed with its face toward the wall. Then he went back to the other cell, closed off the secret passage, and got into the sack they had sewed up the body in. Monte Cristo closed his eyes and seemed to experience once again all the sensations he had felt when the coarse cloth of the sack, still impregnated with the cold which the corpse had communicated to it, had rubbed across his face. The guide continued. This was his plan. He assumed that the dead were buried at the Château d'If, and since he was sure they wouldn't go the expense of providing coffins for prisoners, he planned to push his way up out of the ground. But unfortunately, there was a custom in the prison which ruined his plan. They didn't bury the dead. They only tied a cannonball to their feet and threw them into the sea. And that's what was done to the young man. The next day, they found the priest's body in the young man's bed and guessed everything, especially when the men assigned to throw the body into the sea told something they hadn't dared to tell before, that when they threw the body, they heard a terrible cry which was smothered as soon as the body hit the water. The Count breathed heavily, and anguish clutched at his heart. No, he thought. I began to doubt only because I was beginning to forget, but here the wound in my heart opens again and the thirst for vengeance returns. And he said to the guide, Was anything ever heard of the prisoner again? No, never. He was thrown from a height of about 50 feet, and he hit the water feet first, so the weight of the cannonball must have dragged him down to the bottom of the sea immediately, poor man. So you pity him? Yes, of course, although he died in his own element. What do you mean? They say he was a sailor who was imprisoned for Bonapartism. What was his name? He was known only as number 34. Villefort, thought Monte Cristo. That's what you must have told yourself so many times when my ghost came to trouble your sleep. Would you like to see the rest of the prison, sir? Asked the guide. Yes, especially if you'll show me the poor priest's cell. Come with me, then. Just a moment, said Monte Cristo. I'd like to take one last look at this cell. That suits me very well, said the guide, because I've forgotten the key to the priest's cell. Go and get it, then. I'll leave you the torch. No, take it with you. But you won't have any light in here. I can see in the dark. You're like number 34, then. They say he could see a pin in the darkest corner of his cell. It took him 10 years to accomplish that, thought Monte Cristo. The guide walked away, taking the torch with him. The Count had told the truth. After being in the darkness for only a few seconds, he could see everything with perfect clarity. Yes, he said to himself, this is the stone I used to sit on. And there's a trace of the blood that flowed from my forehead one day when I tried to crush my head against the wall. Those figures, yes, I remember them. I made them one day when I calculated my father's age to see if I would find him still alive, Mercedes' age to see if I would find her still free. I had a moment of hope when I had finished those calculations. I wasn't taking hunger and infidelity into account. A bitter laugh burst from the Count's lips, as in a dream he had just seen his father being taken to the grave and Mercedes walking to the altar. His attention was caught by an inscription on the opposite wall. O God, preserve my memory. Yes, that was my only prayer toward the end of my imprisonment, he thought. I no longer asked for freedom. I asked only to keep my memory because I was afraid I might go mad and forget. You preserved my memory, O God, and I haven't forgotten. Thank you, my God. Thank you. Just then, the light of a torch was reflected on the walls. The guide was returning. Monte Cristo went out to meet him. Follow me, said the guide. He led the Count through an underground corridor to another cell. Monte Cristo saw the remains of the bed on which the Abbé Faria had died. At this sight, instead of the anguish he had felt in his own cell, his heart swelled with a feeling of affection and gratitude, and tears welled up in his eyes. This is the mad priest's cell, said the guide, pointing to an opening which had remained unclosed. He added, That's where the young man came in to see him. Judging from the appearance of the stone, a learned man said the two prisoners communicated with each other for about 10 years. Those 10 years must have seemed terribly long to them, poor men. Dantès took several 20-franc coins from his pocket and handed them to the man who had just pitied him for the second time without knowing him. The guide accepted them, thinking he was only being given some small change. Then, looking at them by the light of his torch, he recognized their true value. "You've made a mistake, sir." "What do you mean?" "These are gold coins you gave me." "I know that." "You intended to give them to me." "Yes." The guide looked at Monte Cristo in astonishment. "Sir," he said, "I don't understand your generosity." "It's not too difficult to understand. You see, I, too, was once a sailor, so I particularly was touched by the story you told me." "Well, then, since you're so generous, sir, I ought to offer you something also." "What do you have to offer me?" "Something connected with the story I just told you." "Really?" cried the Count eagerly. "What is it?" "Well, I'll tell you. One day I said to myself, you can always find something in a cell where a prisoner lived for 15 years. I began to tap on the walls. After a while, I discovered a hollow sound near the head of the bed under the hearth. I lifted out the stones and found a rope ladder and some tools," cried the Count. "How did you know that?" asked the guide in surprise. "I didn't know it. I only guessed it. That's usually the sort of thing a prisoner hides in his cell." "Do you still have them?" "No, sir. I sold them to visitors. But I have something else." "What is it?" asked the Count impatiently. "I still have a sort of book written on strips of cloth." "Oh!" cried Monte Cristo. "You still have that book?" "I don't know if it's a book, but I still have it." "Go get it for me." The guide left the cell. Monte Cristo knelt reverently before the remains of that bed which death had transformed into an altar for him. "Oh, my second father," he said, "you gave me freedom, knowledge, and wealth. You, who, like the beings of a superior order, had the knowledge of good and evil. If, after the transfiguration of the body, there still remains something animate in the places where we have loved or suffered deeply, noble heart, supreme intellect, profound soul, give me some sign, I beg you. Take away this doubt, which, if it changes to a conviction, will also become remorse." The Count bowed his head and joined his hands. "Here it is, sir," said a voice behind him. He started and turned around. The guide was holding out to him those strips of cloth on which the Abbé Faria had poured out all the treasures of his knowledge and wisdom. They formed the manuscript of his great work on the monarchy of Italy. The Count seized them eagerly. The first thing his eyes fell on was the epigraph: "Thou shalt tear out the teeth of the dragon and trample the lions under foot. Thus saith the Lord." "Ha!" cried Monte Cristo. "There's my answer. Thank you, father, thank you." He drew out of his pocket a small wallet containing 10 banknotes of 1,000 francs each. "Here," he said to the guide, "take this wallet." "Are you giving it to me?" "Yes, but on condition that you won't look inside it till after I've gone." Pressing the precious relic to his chest, Monte Cristo hurried out of the dungeon and went back to the boat. "Back to Marseilles," he said. As he sailed away from the sombre prison, he kept his eyes fixed on it and said to himself, "Woe to those who put me into that wretched dungeon, and to those who forgot I was there." The victory was complete. The Count of Monte Cristo had twice vanquished doubt. After stepping ashore, he went to the cemetery where he had found Maximilien. 10 years earlier, Monte Cristo had also made a pious pilgrimage to that cemetery, but having returned to France with all his millions, he had been unable to find the grave of his father, who had died of hunger. Maximilien's father had fared better, having died in the arms of his children. He had been laid to rest by them beside his wife, who had preceded him by 2 years. 2 large slabs of marble with their names inscribed on them had been placed side by side within a little enclosure formed by an iron railing and shaded by 4 cypress trees. Maximilien was leaning against one of those trees and staring dully at the 2 tombstones. His grief was profound, almost overwhelming. "Maximilien," said the Count, "you told me during the journey that you wanted to stay here in Marseilles for several days. Is that still your wish?" "I have no more wishes, Count, but it seems to me I'd wait a little less painfully here than anywhere else." "Good. I'm going to leave you for a while, but you'll still keep your word, won't you?" The young man let his head fall to his chest. "You have my promise," he said, after a moment of silence. "But remember, I'll expect you on the Isle of Monte Cristo on the 5th of October. On the 4th, a yacht will be waiting for you in the harbor of Bastia. The name of the yacht will be the Eros. Give your name to the captain, and he'll take you to me." "I'll do as promised, Count, but remember that on the 5th of October I've told you 20 times that if you still want to die on that day, I'll help you myself. And now goodbye. You're leaving me? Yes, I have something to do in Italy. I'm leaving right away. The steamer is waiting for me. Will you come with me to the harbor? I'm at your disposal, Count. Maximilien accompanied Monte Cristo to the harbor. Smoke was already pouring out of the stacks of the steamboat when they arrived. It set out soon afterward. An hour later, it had almost vanished on the eastern horizon.